An ordinary morning at a downtown bank suddenly turned shocking when staff humiliated an elderly woman in front of everyone. They kicked her out, leaving her trembling and in tears. But just when things seemed hopeless, the doors opened, and NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal walked in. What he did next left the entire bank speechless. Stay tuned, because you won't believe how this story ends. It all began on a bright weekday morning inside a bustling downtown bank. The air was filled with the constant hum of chatter, the tapping of keyboards, and the occasional ring of telephones. Customers formed a long line, each holding deposit slips, checks, or cards, while the staff behind the counters moved quickly, shuffling papers and typing away on their computers. To anyone watching, it was just another ordinary day. But in the corner of that busy room, a scene was about to unfold that would silence everyone and leave an unforgettable mark on their hearts. Slowly, the heavy glass doors opened, and in stepped an elderly woman named Mrs. Clara. She was frail, her silver hair tucked neatly behind her ears, and she wore a simple light blue cardigan that had clearly been washed and worn many times. In her hands, she clutched an old purse, the kind that had been stitched back together more than once. Every step she took seemed careful, measured, her thin frame slightly hunched, but her dignity still intact. Clara moved toward the counter with the patience of someone who had lived through many storms. She wasn't here for anything complicated, nothing that required paperwork an inch thick. All she wanted was to withdraw a small amount of money, just enough to buy groceries for the week and refill her prescription medication. To her, this was a routine task. To the bank staff, however, it seemed like an inconvenience. As she reached the counter, she gave the young clerk a warm smile and placed her worn-out checkbook on the counter. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice gentle but steady. "I'd like to withdraw some cash, please." The clerk barely looked at her before frowning. "Identification, please," he demanded flatly. Clara's smile faded just a little. She reached into her purse, pulling out a stack of papers, utility bills, an old voter card, and even her medical prescription. "I lost my main ID card recently," she explained, her tone polite but pleading. "But I've been banking here for more than 30 years. You must have me in your system. Please, I only need a small withdrawal." The clerk glanced at the papers, sighed, and shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Without proper identification, I can't process this. It's policy." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she pushed the papers closer. "But I have all of these documents. My name, my address, it's all there. I even have my account number written down. Please, I need this money for my medicine." Instead of compassion, the clerk's voice grew sharp. "I said no, ma'am. You'll have to come back when you have the right ID. Next customer, please." The words hit Clara like a slap. She stood frozen, her wrinkled hands still gripping the counter. The line behind her began to murmur, some impatient, others curious. Her face reddened with embarrassment as she tried once more. "I don't have anyone to help me. Please, it's urgent. I can't wait weeks for a new card." The murmurs grew louder, and soon the clerk waved over a manager. A tall man in a dark suit approached, his expression already annoyed as if Clara's very presence was a disruption to his perfectly ordered day. "What's going on here?" he asked sharply. The clerk explained in a dismissive tone, "She doesn't have proper ID and insists on withdrawing money." The manager turned to Clara, his patience already thin. "Ma'am, rules are rules. If you don't have the proper identification, you cannot withdraw funds. It's that simple." Clara's lips quivered as she pleaded one last time. "Please, sir. I've been a customer here longer than you've worked here. I've trusted this bank my whole life. I only need a little money to get by." But instead of kindness, the manager raised his voice. "Enough. You're holding up the line. If you don't have the required documents, you need to leave. Now." The harshness of his words cut through the air, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Heads turned, whispers spread, and some customers looked on with pity while others shook their heads in disbelief. Clara felt her knees weaken as her dignity crumbled. Her eyes filled with tears, not just from being denied money, but from the humiliation of being treated like she was invisible, like she didn't matter. She had lived a full life, raised children, contributed to her community, and faithfully kept her account active for decades. And now, in her twilight years, she was being pushed aside like she was nothing more than a burden. She gathered her papers slowly, her hands shaking, her heart heavy. The bank that once felt like a place of trust now felt like a cold and unforgiving cage. Customers watched as she stood there, trembling, her eyes downcast. And just when it seemed like the weight of the world was pressing down on her shoulders, just when she thought no one cared, and no one would step in, something happened that no one could have predicted. The glass doors behind her swung open, and a presence walked in that would change everything. The air inside the bank was thick with tension. Customers whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads at the way the elderly woman had been treated, while others avoided eye contact, afraid to get involved. Mrs. Clara stood there frozen, her purse clutched tightly against her chest, tears threatening to fall. She looked small and powerless, as though the entire world had turned its back on her. And then, just as the manager barked at her to leave, the heavy glass doors at the entrance swung open. In walked a man whose presence immediately shifted the energy of the room. He was enormous, towering over everyone in sight, with broad shoulders and arms that looked like they were carved from stone. He wore a bright red Lakers jersey, number 33 across the chest, and his stride was slow, deliberate, and commanding. It was Shaquille O'Neal. Even if someone didn't watch basketball, they would have recognized him instantly. Shaq wasn't just a retired NBA superstar, he was larger than life, a figure known around the world not only for his legendary career but also for his generous heart. Wherever he went, people noticed. And today, at this bank, his timing couldn't have been more perfect. The conversations in the room stopped mid-sentence. A child tugged at his mother's arm, whispering, "Mom, it's Shaq." Phones were subtly pulled out as customers tried to snap photos or videos without drawing too much attention. The manager, who had moments ago been barking orders at Clara, suddenly found his voice caught in his throat. Shaq's eyes scanned the room, and it didn't take him long to figure out what was happening. He saw Clara, trembling and frail, standing at the counter with papers scattered before her. He saw the shame and sadness in her expression, and he noticed the way the staff stood with cold indifference. His jaw tightened. With long, powerful strides, Shaq walked straight past the line of waiting customers and stood beside Clara. Towering over the counter, he placed one massive hand gently on her shoulder and leaned down slightly so his voice could reach her softly. "Ma'am," he said, his deep voice rumbling through the silent bank, "are you okay?" Clara looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, she forgot about her embarrassment, her sadness, because here was Shaquille O'Neal, a man she had only ever seen on TV, now standing beside her like a guardian angel. Her lips trembled as she whispered, They won't let me take out my money. I just needed it for my medicine." Shaq nodded slowly, his expression darkening with every word she said. He turned his gaze toward the bank staff, and suddenly the entire room felt smaller, like the walls themselves were closing in. The clerk who had dismissed Clara shrank back into his chair. The manager straightened his suit nervously, his confidence evaporating under Shaq's glare. The atmosphere was so heavy that even the customers could feel it. The whispers stopped completely, all eyes were on the towering figure and the trembling woman he now stood beside. Shaq's voice, though calm, carried the weight of authority. "Why is this woman being treated like this?" he asked, his tone sharp enough to cut through the silence. The manager cleared his throat, fumbling for words. "Yes, sir, it's just policy. She didn't have the proper identification, so we couldn't." Shaq raised his hand slightly, cutting him off. His voice was firmer this time, almost thunderous. "Policy is one thing. Respect is another. She's a customer. She's a human being. And you thought it was okay to embarrass her in front of everyone here?" The words echoed across the room. Even the security guard by the door shifted uncomfortably. Customers glanced at one another, some nodding in agreement, others holding up their phones higher to record the moment. Shaq wasn't just another customer standing up for someone. He was a global icon, someone with influence, someone whose words would not be ignored. The staff realized instantly that this situation had spiraled far beyond their control. Clara, still overwhelmed, reached for Shaq's hand. "Thank you," she whispered softly. "I didn't think anyone would care." Shaq gave her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, ma'am," he said gently. "I've got you." The room was no longer just a bank, it had become a stage. And everyone knew the story that was unfolding in front of them was something extraordinary. The room felt like it had frozen in time. Every eye was locked on Shaquille O'Neal as he stood tall, his hands still resting protectively on Mrs. Clara's shoulder. The towering figure of the NBA legend was intimidating enough, but it wasn't his size that silenced the bank, it was the fire in his eyes. Shaq took a step closer to the counter, his massive frame leaning forward just slightly, making the manager visibly nervous. His voice, deep and steady, carried across the room. "Why," he asked, pausing for emphasis, "are you treating this woman like she doesn't matter?" The clerk, who had been so dismissive just moments before, suddenly looked small and insignificant behind his computer screen. He avoided Shaq's eyes, fiddling with his keyboard as if searching for an escape. The manager, however, tried to hold on to his authority. He cleared his throat and said, "Sir, we're only following policy. She didn't have the right identification, and without it, we can't release the funds." Shaq tilted his head slightly, studying the man with a look that made him squirm. His voice grew firmer. "Policy is one thing. Humanity is another. This woman has been banking here for 30 years. She trusted this institution with her money. And today, when she needed your help the most, you humiliated her instead." The manager opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. Shaq wasn't finished. "You raised your voice at her. You told her to leave. You treated her like she was a burden, not a customer. Do you know how disrespectful that is? Do you know how it feels to stand there, vulnerable, and be told you're not good enough? Because I promise you, she does." His words echoed like thunder, each one striking the hearts of everyone present. The bank staff shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with both Shaq and Clara. The customers, meanwhile, began nodding, murmuring their agreement. One man in line whispered loudly enough to be heard, "He's right. That was wrong." A woman pulled out her phone and started recording openly now, her camera pointed directly at the confrontation. Others followed, capturing the moment from different angles. The bank's polished image was crumbling right there, under the watchful eyes of both Shaq and dozens of recording devices. The manager tried to regain control, his voice shaky. We didn't mean to be disrespectful. It's just..." Shaq cut him off again, his voice sharper this time. "You didn't mean it. You told her to leave like she was trash. That's not policy. That's arrogance." Clara, who had been trembling moments earlier, looked up at Shaq with wide, grateful eyes. For the first time that day, she didn't feel alone. She felt protected, valued, and respected. Shaq placed his other hand on the counter, leaning in closer so that the manager could feel the full weight of his presence. "I've spent my whole career standing up against challenges. And I'll tell you right now, this is the kind of behavior that should never happen again. Not to her. Not to anyone." The silence in the bank was deafening. The confrontation had shifted the entire mood of the room. What began as a cruel dismissal of an elderly woman had turned into a public reckoning, one that no one present would ever forget. The tension in the bank was so thick you could almost feel it pressing down on everyone's chest. The staff stood frozen, customers whispered in shock, and the manager's face had turned pale. But Shaq wasn't about to let this end with just words, he was a man of action. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his checkbook. The sight of the massive man carefully flipping it open drew gasps from the crowd. With his large hands, he took out a pen and began writing. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint scratching of ink on paper. When he was done, he tore out the check and placed it gently into Clara's trembling hands. "Here," Shaq said, his voice calm but powerful. "This will cover your groceries, your medicine, and a little extra, so you don't have to worry." Clara's eyes widened as she looked at the slip of paper in her hands. She blinked rapidly, her lips quivering as though she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. For a woman who had just been humiliated, this sudden act of kindness felt like a miracle. But Shaq wasn't finished. He turned back toward the staff, his expression serious. "This isn't just about money," he said firmly. "This is about respect. About dignity. You don't treat people like this. Especially not the elderly, people who've worked their whole lives, paid their dues, and trusted you with everything they had." The bank manager shifted nervously, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. The clerk who had dismissed Clara lowered his head in shame, unable to meet Shaq's gaze. Customers erupted into applause. Some clapped, others cheered, and a few shouted words of support. One man called out, "That's how you do it, Shaq," while another woman wiped tears from her eyes, whispering, "God bless him." Clara clutched the check close to her chest, her frail body trembling, not from fear this time, but from overwhelming gratitude. She looked up at Shaq and whispered, "Thank you, son, thank you for seeing me." Shaq placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and smiled warmly. "Always, ma'am. Always." In that moment, the bank was no longer a place of cold transactions. It had become the stage for a powerful lesson, one about kindness, justice, and standing up when it matters most. The applause inside the bank slowly faded, but the impact of what had just happened lingered in the air like electricity. Customers were still whispering to one another, shaking their heads in disbelief at how quickly the atmosphere had changed, from one of humiliation and cruelty to one of respect and compassion. Mrs. Clara, still holding the check close to her chest, looked up at Shaq with tears streaming down her cheeks. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but in the quiet of the moment, everyone could hear her words, "You reminded me there are still good people in this world." Shaq smiled softly and replied, "There will always be good people, ma'am. Sometimes you just have to stand tall until they show up." Those words struck the room like a bell, echoing in the hearts of everyone present. Customers who had stood silently just minutes before now felt inspired. A few even walked up to Clara afterward, offering hugs, handshakes, and words of encouragement. For her, it wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about being seen, respected, and defended. But the story didn't stay inside the walls of that bank. Dozens of bystanders had captured the entire confrontation on their phones. Within hours, the videos hit social media. Within days, they had gone viral. Headlines read, "Shaquille O'Neal stands up for elderly woman at local bank and Shaq turns humiliation into hope." The bank itself faced enormous backlash. People flooded their customer service lines demanding answers, and the branch manager was forced to issue a public apology. Soon after, the bank announced new training programs focused on empathy, respect, and customer care. The incident had forced them to change, and all because one man refused to stay silent. As for Clara, her life was never quite the same. She didn't just walk away with financial help, she walked away with her dignity restored. She became a symbol of resilience, and her story reminded thousands across the country that no one, no matter how small or powerless they may seem, deserves to be ignored. And Shaq? He went on with his day like it was nothing. But to Clara, and to everyone who witnessed that moment, he had been a hero. Not the kind that wears a cape, but the kind that wears a jersey and carries a heart big enough to change the world. And that's how one act of kindness turned humiliation into hope. Shaq didn't just give Mrs. Clara money, he gave her dignity back, and taught the world a powerful lesson about respect. What do you think? Should more celebrities use their platform to stand up for ordinary people like this? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story inspired you, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss more powerful stories like this one.